But just for the record, Brittany Roethemeier, I'm the executive director of Fayette Alliance. We have been, studying this issue since it first came to the Planning Commission when it was an organization, initiated ZOTA by Silicon Ranch in the beginning of 2024. You all just went through a timeline, and so I won't go through that again. But again, just to kind of highlight and emphasize, the Planning Commission voted to prohibit large-scale solar and ag zones in September of 24. The council voted to uphold the majority of those recommendations, added some additional provisions in August of 2025. There was the working group that Councilmember Savigny mentioned that started in September of 25 that went through February of 2026. I don't know what was discussed in those working groups. I was able to review the summaries that were provided, but because those working groups were not available to the public, I don't know the majority of what was discussed in them. So the information that I wanted to provide goes to the consideration of how we consider large-scale solar and agricultural zones. And again, if this is a repeat of anything that was discussed in the work group, I apologize to the council members who were a part of that, but without having that information, it's important to me to present on that today. It was my understanding that the Environmental Commission and the Rural Land Management Board have both been asked to provide feedback that's to be considered by the Planning Commission. I don't know what the status of that is or what the time frame on that was, but I did want to mention that those groups had been asked by the council on a short time frame to provide feedback as well. And so, this kind of comes back to our original position on whether or not it's appropriate to permit large-scale solar and agricultural zones. And I think that the changes that we've seen based on the findings that were established by the work group, we just don't believe get at that fundamental question of why is it appropriate to reconsider large-scale industrial producing energy facilities on agricultural land, and what should go into that conversation and what considerations should be discussed if we're talking about whether or not that's appropriate. I think that the recommendations, from the council obviously permit that and work to mitigate it. But I think that original question that is being skipped over here is that an appropriate use on our prime soils? And I think that, in our community, as you all well know, we have an obligation to protect our best resources. And I think that the recommended changes at this point simply don't do this. I would say that I have reviewed dozens and dozens of ordinances from all over the country, namely communities that have agricultural economies. And I think that's really important for us to consider. I would say almost every single one of those ordinances that I've reviewed up and down the East Coast are all very clear in their intent to protect their prime soils and soils of statewide significance when they're evaluating solar facilities and how to implement solar in their own communities. And I think that that's something that the recommendations and the ordinance that's provided here to permit large-scale solar and ag zones just doesn't do. And I think that just mitigating the consequences of development, I don't think is appropriate for this community based on what we have here. And I think that that's really the difference between other ordinances in the country and this one that's in front of you all to consider. We don't believe that that's responsible in light of the importance of the soils of this community. And I think we're owed, a really kind of important community conversation about the importance of those soils. And I think it should be on the record, why we're raising this again and why we're having this conversation. It's a worthwhile conversation. Thinking about how we can promote renewables in this community is vital. It's critical to community members. It's critical to our decision makers, our elected officials, all our commission members. We know how important it is. And I think that there's, numerous opportunities to explore what those responsible provisions are. And so I wanted to provide some context on that today. You all have some materials in front of you. I just wanted to include some of these maps. I know this is small on the screen. And so in the green folder, you've got some of these maps and information. But why do we keep, there you go. And I just think it's, again, important to provide information on the record about why why Fayette Alliance as an organization is saying we do not believe that this use is appropriate on agricultural land. So we're obviously very fortunate to have the soils that we do. Why do we protect this land? We know we've got approximately 180,000 acres in Fayette County, and the rural service area outside the urban service boundary is about 125,000 acres. Digging deeper into that, we've got 74,000 of those acres that are designated as prime farmland, and then 38,000 acres of that rural service area is designated, as soils of statewide significance. That is nearly 112,000 acres that are the best soils in the country for producing food and fiber. And that really is the basis of this conversation that I just want to make sure is thoroughly considered as we're evaluating these recommendations. We've got a number of other environmental considerations. As we have this conversation, this is from the Rural Land Management Board. Again, talks about all of the other important environmental considerations in our rural service area. Again, that also is really important to be considered here as we evaluate whether or not to permit this type of use in our agricultural zones. I didn't know if someone from the National Resource Conservation Service, I don't know if they spoke to the working group. I don't know if they're going to be able to speak to you all as a group. That is a division of the USDA. They are the soil experts in the state of Kentucky. And then we also have a local NRCS representative. They do a lot of work with the Rural Land Management Board and are just soil experts. So I'm not going to play this, but in case that Steve Blanford, who is our local NRCS representative, couldn't be here, I will share the video with you all. Farm Bureau did an excellent video a couple of years ago and interviewed Steve Blanford, who's one of our soil scientists, to speak about the quality of soils in Fayette County and why they're important. It's one thing for me to kind of be standing up here talking about that. It's another for you all to hear from an expert in soils, about why exactly this land is unique and why organizations like Fayette Alliance continue to stand in front of you and advocate for consideration of those soils. So I'll send that video out to you all in case that no one from NRCS can actually come and speak to you all, and you all can hear from the experts themselves. So how do we use that farmland? This is newer information from when the last time I presented to you all, when the census information came out. We've got 682 farms in Fayette County, which is an increase. We're one of the only, I would say, counties probably in the country that is actually increasing the amount of farms in our rural areas. The market value of products sold annually, and this is, of course, from 2022, is the most recent information, was $333 million, which was an increase from the last time the census was done in 2017. Fayette County ranks third in the state for ag product sales. And I thought that this was an interesting stat that also put us in context nationally. Fayette County ranks 424th out of more than 3,000 other counties in the country that are producing these same products. I think that's really significant. We know that we have such a strong ag industry because our land uses ensure that our ag land is protected for agricultural uses and agricultural purposes. And once we begin saying, well, we can use that land for industrial uses with a little bit of agriculture, we begin to undermine the foundation that this community really stands on. We begin to impact the number of ag operations that want to be located near an industrial use. We reduce ag land that's available to local Fayette County farmers and beyond. And I think that the choices that we make in our policies have ripple effects. And I hope that you all are able to hear from farmers in Fayette County to speak to this. They're the ones that are going to be most directly impacted by the use of our land in these types of quantities if we were to permit this type of use in our rural area. So I think that that's important to note. I think this is no surprise to anybody, but the top products in Fayette County are horses, cattle, and crops. Hogs, pigs, and sheep are not measured in the census because the amounts are so minimal, it would give away individual operation information. So those are not counted, but there is a livestock inventory. In 2022 in Fayette County, there were 12,000 cattle, 16,000 horses. We have the most horses in the state, 2,000 chickens, and about 500 sheep and lambs. I know this is not the first time you all have seen information about our economic impact study of ag that was done actually by Dr. Davis and her team at the University of Kentucky. They originally did this study in 2017. We had it updated to make sure that we were accounting for what's the economic impact of agriculture here in Fayette County on our local economy every single year. And Dr. Davis and her team found that the ag cluster in Fayette County, which includes a lot of different things, business service, retail, wholesale trade, all that's solely dedicated to agriculture. And so Dr. Davis and her team were really clear that this is a conservative number because these industries that they've counted in this economic impact are solely 100% dedicated to ag, that those businesses generate $2.6 billion in economic activity in Fayette County every single year, and another $1 billion in additional profits, incomes, and dividends that goes into the pockets of our community members every single year. Our ag industry supports 16,000 jobs and contributes $13 million to the local tax base every year. We also know that a reduction in ag industries has a ripple effect throughout the community because it's so closely tied to the other industries in our community as well. And the study found that if ag production declines by just 10%, that there will be an additional overall decrease of $20 million in economic output. I think that's significant, again, because our ag industry is tied to so many other industries in this community. I wanted to speak on tourism. There is a printout in your folder of the economic impact report from Visit Lex. Again, I don't know if someone from the tourism group is going to be here to talk to you all. They just put out the 2025 economic impact report. That reported that as of 2025, they've set another record. Nearly 12,000 people are employed by the tourism industry, and tourism has a $131 million economic impact on local and state taxes. So the tourism aspect of our community is obviously another huge pillar of our economy, an important consideration to make. So I included, and again, you all may have copies of these already, but the findings from the council work group. And again, this is, from my understanding and following this along, the findings are what the council then worked from to make the recommendations to the ZOTA that you all are considering here today. And again, without having been privy to what was discussed in that work group, I can only go based on those findings. And in the extensive amount of research that I have done personally and that Fayette Alliance has done over the past going on 3 years, I think there were some important points to discuss about those findings. And so there were findings and the findings are on the right side of your folder, just for easy access. So there were findings about power generation and the grid that listed I think a couple of important points that are not addressed there was any measurable way to evaluate the energy that's created by solar, how many Lexingtonians are going to be served by energy creation, or how electricity transmission wholesalers like PJM work when energy and generated in Lexington is sold to those types of institutions. The wholesale energy networks are incredibly confusing. It's taken me a long time to wrap my mind around them, but I think understanding as a community how those work is important to understanding the impact of using ag land for industrial scale energy generation. As far as the environmental findings, some of the questions that still existed there was that those findings didn't speak to the creation of additional urban development and new expansion areas and plans for reducing carbon emissions. I know that the working group was only focused on ag areas, but it did raise this question that we know that urban development is the largest source of carbon emissions. And so as we expand nearly 3,000 acres as of 2023, how are we going to continue to create sustainability instead of only looking to our ag areas to do that? I think there's a missing explanation about soil quality in Fayette County. Again, that's what I wanted to speak on to you all today, and hope that you all will have some additional input from soil scientists about how soil quality can actually be maintained, and the importance of maintaining it is something, again, the fundamental questions I feel like we're really missing from the work group recommendations and then the recommendations that you all are considering. Another piece with stormwater management practices. There was a new study from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that was very clear that existing stormwater management regulations for commercial and industrial development are not adequate for solar. They go through what those best practices recommendations are for stormwater management. A lot of other communities in the country are revising their own stormwater management regulations because they've seen the negative impacts. As we evaluate how to regulate solar here, I think that that's something we should be thinking of. We have the benefit of now learning from what other communities are experiencing. Let us not put ourselves in the same position that a lot of communities in Virginia and across the country have been in when they've seen the negative impacts of stormwater regulation manuals because they cannot adequately account for how we need to be managing stormwater with solar regulations. I think that getting input from Fayette County farmers who are actually working the land and understanding how those types of issues can be mitigated, how impacts from solar development can be mitigated are really critical. I think notably missing is any criteria for discouraging or preventing solar development on prime soils or soils of statewide significance, other than including the definitions. It is just simply missing from these recommendations. And that really goes back to the main reason why I'm in front of you all today, to get that on the record and how important those soils are to our economy and our identity, and that we have to be really careful in evaluating how we're going to permit solar in the community. So I think that, the findings also spoke to the economy and jobs. I think what's missing from those findings is there's no report out on the long-term jobs that are created by solar development. We know from solar companies, reports to the state and more, that those are very minimal. I think that's important to have on the record. There are other economic considerations as it relates to large-scale solar impact to ag industries that are impacted by co-location of solar and ag or nearby locations to solar development. Something I did want to mention is that Spikos Farm is a farm out in Newtown Pike. It's a sport horse farm. It's about 800 acres, eerily kind of similar acreage as the original Silicon Ranch proposal. Spikos did their own economic impact study by Ernst & Young, which is a national accounting firm. Spikos Farm every single year supports more than 60 jobs, and more than $10 million of local economic impact every year. Those are the types of operations that I think we put in danger by considering large-scale uses of solar in our community. Do we have other ag operations that rely on our land being zoned for agriculture that are going to want to locate around these types of facilities? So it's not, are we displacing current farms? It's also, are we discouraging the continued use of our ag land for ag operations? Someone asked Lisa Laurie, is she likely to locate her farm with all the impacts that it has next to a solar farm? I think that'd be an interesting question for the currently operating ag folks here in this community. I think understanding from nearby neighborhoods is also really important. I know that Councilmember Boone has already received, because I was copied on those emails, emails from concerned residents about clearing of vegetation and trees by East Kentucky Power for the project that's currently proposed and moving forward on Winchester Road. I think some serious consideration of buffering and setbacks and viewshed protections needs to be had. Impact from neighbors that are going to be extremely directly impacted by these types of uses is really important. So some other things that I wanted to point out that I don't think were appropriately addressed was the unenforceability of an acreage cap on large-scale solar projects, the unenforceability of community benefits agreements, and then the appropriateness of conditional use permits for uses that are as large as we're talking about. The last presentation, from Silicon Ranch, there was an increase in the acreage that they're proposing for this development. In 24 it was 790 acres. Now it's 890 acres. We're, nearly 1,000 acres we're talking about utilizing for one project. Toyota in Georgetown is 1,300 acres, and that employs 10,000 Kentuckians. We're talking about a nearly 1,000 acre project that might employ 4 to 5 long-term jobs. So again, these are just really serious considerations that I hope will be considered by this group as we continue to evaluate these recommendations and what and where these types of things are appropriate. So again, just a reminder about the acreage. We know also that we've got about 750 acres in current development of large-scale solar in Fayette County. That's not subject to local planning and zoning. We've got 350 acres on the Haley Pike landfill, and then another 400 acres by East Kentucky Power. Again, that's currently underway. So we also have a lot to learn from those projects. How are those projects impacting this community? What are we learning from things like neighbor feedback about what appropriate setbacks are? What are we learning from them clear cutting trees and things about what kind of buffers and vegetational requirements we're going to put into place? Like I mentioned, done extensive research, reviewed dozens and dozens of national organization recommendations, as well as municipality ordinances. And very overwhelmingly, those ordinances and recommendations are protect prime farmland, encourage siting to avoid prime farmland and soils of statewide significance. And I, utilize industrial areas, commercial areas, and the built environment and marginal farmland for solar development. And I think we have to seriously consider those recommendations and what they're based on as we think about what's appropriate here in Fayette County. Because, we are uniquely situated with our soils. This is just a sampling of ordinances that I've reviewed from many different states and national and state organizations as well. So, again, I appreciate the opportunity to share this information, to put this on the record for consideration as we continue to evaluate, what is appropriate here in Fayette County. And just a reminder of why I stand before you again, and make clear that we do not support large-scale solar on ag land. These are some of the reasons why, I'll continue to provide position statements to you all that really dig into the details. There's a lot of nuance to this. It's not just, should we support solar in the rural area? That skims the surface of this question. It's so nuanced and technical, and we have a lot to learn that we can learn from other communities across the country and what they've experienced, what they've learned. And I hope that we take the time to do that and ask this fundamental question of, is it appropriate in our community based on the soils that we have and the agricultural industries that are so vital to our community? So I appreciate you all considering this information. I'm happy to provide any follow-up info as needed, but I hope that those handouts are helpful for you. Excuse me.